President Stoichev, thank you very kindly for your generous remarks and your warm welcome to the University of Saskatchewan. To you and all of your distinguished academic colleagues at this great institution of higher learning in this country, Mayor Clark and members of council, Chief Bobby Cameron from the FSIN and other chiefs that I recognize throughout the room, and Métis leaders as well here this evening. Thank you for your welcome. Thank you all for coming tonight. Good evening to each and every one of you. I'm certainly glad every time I have the opportunity to be back at the University of Saskatchewan because it is my alma mater, and over the years we've been able to do some interesting projects together. And as Peter has mentioned, just in this past year, we have presided over projects that will invest in this institution something in excess of $150 million to support learning and innovation and brain power at the University of Saskatchewan, here in the province of Saskatchewan, and indeed all around the world. So the relationship is big and it's strong, and it's good to have this opportunity to kind of show it off to the Prime Minister. So this is always on his radar screen. We've also been able to do some good work this past year on a great many other projects working with the province of Saskatchewan for mental health and home care. There's $500 million for infrastructure and for science. There are trade projects that expand the capacity for Saskatchewan producers of beef and pork and canola to export around the world. There's $54 million more for affordable housing in this province. A very important $8.4 billion nationally to invest in Indigenous housing and infrastructure and health and education to narrow the life gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. A big portion of that flows to Saskatchewan simply because of the demographics of this province. And most recently, some very important energy transmission projects that will benefit Saskatchewan in some 20,000 jobs that will be created across Western Canada, and some $10 billion in private sector investment. So some good things have been done. There's a lot more to do, of course, and in listening to you, the Canadian government learns better about what those things are. The whole world is living today through turbulent and consequential times. A time, an era in the history of the world that demands real leadership. Leadership that motivates and animates and energizes. Leadership that engages, listens, and accounts. And that's what this particular Prime Minister of Canada does so very well. In forums like this one, in every corner of the country, to listen and to account in a direct, unfiltered, and face-to-face fashion. And tonight, it's in the city of Saskatoon. So you're all welcome. Thank you for coming. Thank you for what you will contribute to this dialogue. Ladies and gentlemen, Justin Trudeau.
Thank you, Saskatoon. Thank you, Ralph, for your warm words. Thank you, President, for welcoming us here. Thank you for the welcome onto traditional Treaty 6 territory. It's a real pleasure to be here. Please sit down. We're all friends here. I'm really pleased with this. This is a great turnout. It shows that, and there's an overflow room over down the hall as well. It really shows that people are interested in engaging in the political process, in being part of coming out in the evening and talking with the Prime Minister, asking questions, sharing some of the things that are important to you that we think about, figuring out where we're going as a country, talking about how we can, each of us as citizens, play a role in participating in building a better future for ourselves, for our kids, for our grandkids. That's very much what I've been doing over the past weeks across the country. This has been my 9th town hall. And it's been great. There's been a huge range of questions on everything from mental health. And, of course, we need to talk about that today because it's Bell Let's Talk Day. And if we haven't retweeted that and shared our stories about struggles with mental health, we need to. Questions about veterans. To have a day of experiencing, some of the things that that Toronto had to offer. They went to a couple of Raptors games and had a really jam-packed couple of days. And I got to sit down with them and talk with a few of them, including Jeremiah, who asked me to give a shout out to this girl he knew, Shaylee, which was something I was glad to do that night at the town hall I hit in London. A little reminder that kids are kids wherever they are. And regardless of the tragedies and the difficulties people are facing, we need to make sure we're allowing kids to remain kids and giving them the experiences and the hope and the opportunities that we need to have across the country. We have big challenges across this country on a broad range of issues, but one of the things that constantly reminds me of why we do this and encourages me to think that we are going to be able to work together successfully to build the best possible future for ourselves, for our communities, for our kids, is our capacity to roll up our sleeves and tackle these problems together. And that's why I'm so pleased to be here tonight, to hear from all of you, to chat with you about some of the issues you're facing, and mostly to keep working hard every day for you as we move forward as a country. So thank you very much for being here tonight, and I'm looking forward to getting to your questions. Merci. So, there you are, Charlie Clark, your mayor, right there, right in front of me. I was busy looking at the crowd. Let's start with a question from this section here. Yeah, you, sir. I'm sure there's a mic coming down to you right now.
Good evening, Mr. Prime Minister. Thanks for coming up. The question I have for you is actually, it's related to the carbon tax policy that you're looking at putting out. Of course, this being Saskatchewan, I'm sure you saw that coming. The question I have for you is, what's the strategy behind choosing to pursue a carbon tax when there's ample evidence on the record in other jurisdictions showing that policy hasn't worked? Why are we not pursuing a Made in Canada strategy to combat climate change?
That's a great question, and it's an important one, because we know that one of the things we have to make sure we're doing is creating jobs, protecting jobs, building opportunities for Canadians to have good work today, tomorrow, in the years to come. And that's exactly why we've chosen to move forward in a way that both protects the economy and protects the environment. You talk about a Made in Canada strategy. Well, the fact is we have a Made in Canada strategy, a strategy that draws on the tremendous success that British Columbia has had at pricing carbon and making sure that by putting a price on carbon pollution, their economy is more innovative and they get more solutions and are creating the jobs of tomorrow. But more than that, what we've managed to do coming together, creating a pan-Canadian framework on climate change that allows all provinces to do different things in different ways to respond to their needs and their concerns, and will reduce our carbon emissions. And a part of that is recognizing the challenge of climate change. Part of it is also recognizing the opportunities that come with climate change. It's not a debate anymore. Climate change is real. We're feeling its impacts across the country. We know it's going to get worse. It's going to be more challenging, more floods, more droughts, changing weather patterns, more need to adjust and mitigate and adapt. So the question always is, how do we prepare for that? How do we make sure that, yes, we have good jobs today, but we're also bracing ourselves to manage the challenges that are going to come tomorrow and take advantage of the opportunities that are coming with it. And putting a price on things we don't want, like carbon pollution, is a way of encouraging people to innovate and figure out how to get around it. But I've heard you. This transition period as we figure out how to thrive in an economy that is less reliant on carbon, is going to be tough on certain people. And that's why part of our proposal on pricing carbon pollution, at the core of it, is a promise that any money collected in Saskatchewan will stay in Saskatchewan. Anything anyone here pays in terms of a price on carbon pollution is money that the Premier, not the federal government, will determine how to give back to the people who need it in Saskatchewan. And what that will do in terms of supporting people through this transition is meaningful, because it encourages us to think about ways to pollute less, to innovate more, to think about where the jobs of tomorrow are going to come while doing it today. Now, the previous government talked a big game about growing the economy, but they weren't able, for example, to approve pipelines that are needed to continue to develop responsibly our fossil fuel industry. And I say develop responsibly because we know we do have to figure out how to be less reliant on fossil fuels, but that's going to take significant amounts of time. And in the meantime, we have to make sure that the jobs and the economies that are right now reliant on our fossil fuel industry get incentives to be better at using technology, to emit less, to be more efficient, to become leaders in developing technologies that the world is going to need. And the way we do this, and the way we decided, you know what, we're going to put forward leadership on climate change, we're going to meet our Paris commitments, we're going to support people who need help through this transition, we're going to put a price on carbon, and doing all that will allow us to do something that the previous government wasn't able to do, which is actually get pipelines like the Line 3 pipeline built. That's the balance we have. And that's what we have to try and manage. Now, anytime you're going to make a decision, particularly around pipelines, you're going to have people unhappy with the decision. It's a big decision. There will be some people who said, no, you should have approved all pipelines, and we said no to the Northern Gateway pipeline. There are other people who would say, no, you should approve no pipelines. And no, we did approve two, and it looks like Keystone XL might be back on the table as well. So moving forward in a thoughtful, responsible way that understands that we do have to shift and grow our economies to adapt to the new reality of climate change, the challenges and the opportunities that come with it, in a way that doesn't hurt the most vulnerable, that protects the jobs we have today, and encourages people to think about the cleaner, greener jobs that we know are going to come as we work on it tomorrow. It won't happen fast enough for some. It'll happen too fast for others. But I'm confident that through listening to Canadians, working with good people from coast to coast and coast, we've got that balance right. Thank you very much for your question. A question from the back. You, sir, in the glasses. Yep. Yeah, you. Stand up.
Thank you so much for this evening, Mr. Prime Minister. I'm an international student here from Iran, and I was wondering if you could tell us about your future plans on resuming political ties with my country. As you may know, the Canadian embassy in Tehran is closed right now, and my friends and I, we face many hardships to go to neighboring countries to apply for our Canadian visa, and also our parents have to face these hardships to get a Canadian visa. Thank you.
No, thank you for the question. I think, and welcome here, and thank you for choosing to study here in Saskatchewan. There's many different ways of looking at international relations and how Canada should engage with the world, and I'm of the opinion that engaging in conversations, even with people you disagree with, is better than not talking to people you disagree with. Indeed, in diplomacy, it's more important to have conversations with people you disagree with than just conversations with people you agree with. However, we continue to have significant concerns about the Iranian government, which means we are cautiously reestablishing relations in a way that doesn't ease off on the serious concerns we have around human rights internally, around state sponsorship of terrorism, around concern around the nuclear ambitions that have been expressed in the past, and carefully monitoring the P5+1 agreement that was signed. Being thoughtful about how we engage, because right now anyone needing Canadian consular services in Iran needs to go through Italy. When we had the situation of Dr. Homa Hudfar from Concordia, who was imprisoned in Iran for talking about doing research on feminism, for example, it was work that we did with the Italians, with the Swiss, with the government of Oman, and the Iranian government to try and get her home, and we were successful in that. And part of that success was showing that we weren't unwilling to engage at all with the Iranian government, but that we were ready to talk with them about certain issues and certain files. But we do have to be very thoughtful and responsible in how we approach. But one of the things that I always do is make a very clear distinction between the Iranian people and the Iranian government. I think there's a lot of people in Iran who have questions and challenges around their government, and I think having engagement diplomatically to certain levels is ultimately useful for them. Thank you very much. Question? Yes, you on the side there. Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking my question. My question is in regards to Bill S-217, commonly known as Wynn's Law. I'm sure you're well aware that, unfortunately, 2 years ago, Constable David Wynn was shot and killed in St. Albert. Since then, Michael Cooper has brought this bill forward to help change the law that states that currently the prosecutor or the police service may provide information on past criminal history as well as criminal history currently that person facing the bail hearing is charged with. This bill has been passed unanimously twice in your House of Commons. And on the third reading, the Minister of Justice declined the bill. My question to you, Mr. Prime Minister, is why have we not been given an explanation as to why the government would support this Minister of Justice in declining such an important bill that would improve the safety of all Canadians, not only just our police officers, but also the general public, making this information mandatory to be presented to the Justice of the Peace or the judge granting the bail is quite important. So why would we not make that mandatory? And how can we ask these people granting bail to these criminals, how can we ask them to make that choice without giving them all the information that is quite important for them to make a decision that is already in our law that states that people are only granted bail should they deserve it? And how do they make that choice if they are not presented with the right information? So could you please explain to me why we have not had an explanation on why she would unilaterally decide to decline this bill after it's been unanimously passed twice? And if I may ask, please, I'm sorry, I know I'm getting long-winded, but could I also ask for you to reconsider your position on this bill, because it is just such a small change that the government would make with one word that would have a significant difference in the safety of all Canadians.
First of all, thank you. Thank you for what is obviously a very important issue to you and to a number of people. The fact is, you have me at a bit of a disadvantage. You obviously know a lot more details about this particular piece of legislation than I do. I have an excellent cabinet and an excellent Justice Minister who has my entire confidence and who understands how important it is to keep Canadians safe, to protect Canadians while upholding our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And that's something that we always have to work in balancing. We have to make sure that what Canadians expect is that we be kept safe and our rights be protected. Getting that balance is sometimes a challenge, sometimes counterintuitive. I found myself defending the rights of a convicted terrorist to keep their Canadian citizenship on stage in the last election in a debate. I mean, you'd think on something like that it should be as black and white as if you're convicted of a terrorist offense against Canada, you should be stripped of your citizenship. That seems like something that is obvious, that everyone should be able to agree with. The problem, unfortunately, in that is in the details. Because you can't actually strip any Canadian of their citizenship. You can only strip the citizenship from people who are first or second generation Canadians, who've come here from someone else. And what that does is create two types of consequences for people who are supposed to be equal. Canadians are not supposed to have different degrees of citizenship, whether they are born here or whether they live here. But that's an example of something that seems to be obvious, but is actually more complex. So without going into the details on that particular piece of legislation, I can tell you that we are constantly weighing the importance of protecting Canadians' rights and keeping Canadians safe, particularly the men and women who serve in emergency services as first responders and as police officers. And that's something that I will commit to you to take back to the Minister of Justice and ask her to explain more clearly to you and to Canadians the rationale behind that decision. Thank you very much. Sorry, there's a lot of people with questions here, and I'm going to keep going through. You, sir, standing there waving at me. Yes. Yes, you.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I want to say that I was a young man when your dad was the Prime Minister, and I watched him do a lot of, fantastic things. And the one thing was relating to First Nations treaty rights here in Saskatchewan. I come from Treaty 4, and I know we're celebrating 150 years of Canada this year, but it's been 110 years since part of our treaty lands were taken in 1907. I was told about that in 1973 when I was in grade 10 by one of my grandparents. He said we were going to settle it real soon, but it wasn't until 1996 when I was working on the land claim and did some research that we finally got it. We're still in 1999, I was the chief of the reserve. And I went and argued before your commission for the return of our lands from 1907. And they agreed with our argument when they said Canada owes us the land. They rethought the decision and said Canada doesn't owe cows any land. They go to a second inquiry. The second one says they don't owe us any land. But I think you do. In 1889, there was a member of Parliament that said that if it came down to the interests of the white people in Broadview and the interest of the Indian people over the lands that were nearby, Indian lands, he says the interests of the white people will prevail. So I'm asking you, you don't have to go to any more hearings. We've had all the hearings. We've had all of the judges and people looking at those things and making decisions already. You can take it back to your parliament and right that historic wrong to Cowses. That means a lot. And I've heard you talk about young people, young First Nations women in particular. I have many children. I have many, many grandchildren. And from the 1973 until 1996, the investments of those lands didn't go to that to that generation. We lost that generation. That's why we have gangs here. And so if you don't live up to the obligation and return those 1907 lands to Cowses, we lose another generation. So I'm asking you, can you bring it back to Parliament and bring our land claim back to Parliament and return those lands that belong to Cowses by treaty? Thank you.
Thank you. Canada has not lived up to the spirit and intent of the original treaty relationships. We have failed to keep our word, the promise of shared stewardship of the land, of partnership, of support, of respect, of walking together. And we've failed in so many different ways, through residential schools, policies of assimilation, through lack of trust and respect and partnership. And we have an awful lot to fix. But one of the things that I am so deeply encouraged by is that in the last election and over the past years, Canadians have started to speak clearly and strongly, non-Indigenous Canadians, that this is something that needs to happen. Indigenous Canadians have been clear that reconciliation is essential. And now you have a government that is committed to working side by side with you, with Indigenous peoples across this country, to fix problems that, as you point out, in many cases go back hundreds of years. It's going to be a long process. There are complicated issues to sort out. There are fundamental injustices that continue that you can't just snap your fingers or, put down a pile of money and hope to fix. Issues around making sure that young Indigenous students have the same quality of education, the same kinds of opportunities, the same employment prospects as non-Indigenous students. That health services, mental health services, addiction services be available for people right across the country. That we can demonstrate the kind of infrastructure that will get and put an end to the boil water advisories that continue. Create better access to communications, to physical roads that are all-weather roads, being able to access these communities. We have started in a significant way on multiple fronts, investing real money, $8.4 billion over 5 years in Budget 2016 to start closing the gaps that exist in services and education and many things for Indigenous Canadians. We have worked on accelerating the treaty resolution processes on outstanding claims, and I know the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, Carolyn Bennett, is working very hard on a broad range of them, including on your issue, sir. There is much to do, but I am every day encouraged by the level to which Canadians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, are focused on fixing past wrongs and mostly building a future of opportunity, respect, and true partnership on this land that we share. So I will bring back your concerns and make sure that we're working on them. Thank you very much. Question from down here in the front now. You, sir. Yeah. Right there.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for coming to Saskatchewan today.
No, I don't. No, it's right down here. Sorry. Yes, no, you're on. I'll come back up to the back afterwards.
Okay. So it's me.
Yes, it is you.
Good evening, Prime Minister. My name is James Yu. I'm grade 12 in Edinburgh and Colgate. So a few days ago, Donald Trump, chief economic advisor, stated that the renegotiation of NAFTA shouldn't be a concern for Canada. So my question is Canada in a good position to renegotiate, and also what does Canada want in return? Thank you.
Excellent question. Let's start with what Canadians expect of their Prime Minister in regards to working with the United States. I've heard very, very clearly in coffee shops across the country over the past few weeks in town halls that Canadians want two things from their Prime Minister. They want our government to have a constructive working relationship with the new administration in the United States. It's going to allow us to work together on issues of shared economic interest and the trade relationship, and the millions of jobs on both sides of the border that depend on this relationship is certainly part of it. And they expect us to stay true to the values and principles that make us proud to be Canadian, to understand that diversity is a source of strength, that openness to the world is a good thing for our economy, for our jobs, and for our communities. that we don't have to compromise on security to welcome in Syrian refugees. So those two drives of a constructive working relationship and staying true to our values is what we're focused on as a country. So over the past few weeks, I've had our ambassador and senior officials engaging with the incoming administration to do one thing, first of all, which is to establish very, very clearly the level to which the success of millions of American middle-class jobs depend on smooth flow of goods and services across our shared border. Emphasizing the fact that 35 different American states have Canada as their #1 export partner. And that on a broad range of issues, from labor rights to environmental rights to shared views on living wages and opportunities for people, Canada and the U.S. are very well aligned. These conversations have gone well, but these are negotiations, and we'll see where they take us. But there is no question that it is very clear that the success of the economies on both sides of our border depend on strong working relationships and smooth flow of goods back and forth. We're going to discuss and work with the new administration on a broad range of issues, and we will continue to defend Canadian jobs and Canadian principles. And that's what we want. What do we want? We don't just want prosperity for Canada. We want prosperity for North America. We want opportunities for people around the world, because we know that prosperity can be shared. That good jobs created here at home and opportunities created around the world make the world a better place. So it is with that lens that absolutely we want to help Mr. Trump ensure good jobs for Americans. And one of the best ways to do that is to work well with Canadians while ensuring good jobs for Canadians at the same time. That's the kind of approach that we're taking. Any change in administration brings with it challenges and opportunities, and we are working very, very hard to minimize the challenges and maximize the opportunities. Thank you. Question from the very back. Yeah, back row, you with your, yes, you, yeah, standing up.
Can you hear me? Yes, there we go. So my question is about international development. Canada lacks a development finance institution. We are well behind the other G7 countries in terms of the budget for ODA as a percent of the budget. And the ODA budget has flatlined in recent years. So my question for you is, in 2017, will you predictably increase the budget for ODA, overseas development assistance, and will you, or what else will you do to increase the role of Canada internationally?
Great question. Thank you for your concern and your interest in how Canada can help around the world. A lot of people end up asking the questions. Look, we have real challenges we're facing here in Canada, with marginalized, vulnerable communities that need more help, with challenges around housing, challenges around addictions, challenges around a broad range of issues. Shouldn't we be focusing all our efforts on helping Canadians before we turn around and help people around the world? And of course, we have to make sure we're doing what we can and everything we can to help Canadians. But we also have to know that the world has gotten to be a very small place. And things that happen overseas have direct impacts on us. And one of the best ways to protect not just Canadian security in a physical sense, but protect Canadian economic opportunities, security and stability, is by playing a positive role in the world. Helping kids in sub-Saharan Africa have clean water and go to good schools. helping rebuild parts of the world that have been devastated by floods and extreme weather events. Understanding that building capacity and opportunities for young people in far-off villages to access the internet, to get an education, to become participants in an increasingly knowledge-based global economy is ultimately going to be a guarantor of security and opportunity for Canadians as well. So that's why overseas development assistance is important. But at the same time, we have to recognize that there have been billions upon billions of dollars flowing from Western economies into the developing world. Some has made an extremely positive difference. Other investments haven't moved the dial very much. And we have to be very, very thoughtful about the difference between giving someone fish and teaching someone to fish. We need to make sure that our investments are focused on empowering the most vulnerable in meaningful ways, which means doing more for women and girls in communities around the world, creating opportunities for vulnerable, marginalized communities to become more successful, to become more empowered. We are going to be continuing to invest in predictable ways in overseas development assistance. We're going to be smart about how we leverage private funds and convene nations to work together. And a great example of that is what we did with the Global Fund in the fall of 2016, where Canada pulled together a broad array of nations and raised close to $13 billion to eradicate tuberculosis, malaria, and AIDS by 2030. This is a global effort that Canada is playing a leadership role in. And there's always going to be more needs and more need for more money. Canada is going to be part of the solution, but we're always going to be responsible in how we balance our engagement overseas and leveraging that as best we can with the very real responsibilities we have towards Canadians who are vulnerable, who need help through tough times here at home. There'll never be enough money to do everything we want to do on all aspects. It's about choices. It's about priorities. It's about making our dollars and our support go as far as we possibly can, and that's very much what we're focused on. Thank you for your question. Okay, you in the front. Yes.
Hi there. Hello? Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. As an education student, I just want to know if you miss your classroom at all, or
it's great to be back in one.
Do you think that our current standardized education system is the best way for students to learn, or are you planning on anything to change our current education student? Thank you.
It's a very tempting question for a former teacher, I'll tell you. But I will start by pointing out that I very much respect the Canadian Constitution that says that education is a provincial responsibility from K to 12. And the federal government needs to play a thoughtful, supportive role in that, and I certainly intend to. It's up to the provinces to deliver education, but I certainly know that the way we look at education, the way we look at skills training, the way we look at post-secondary education needs to keep up with the times. We're in a rapidly evolving workplace. We're in a rapidly evolving world that is facing a broad range of new challenges. And we have to give our citizens the tools to cope with that and to thrive within a shifting situation. That means training programs for people who are finding their industries transforming faster than they can adapt. We need to be able to give people new skills around technology, around computers, around new and innovative ways of working that is going to draw on our minds and our skills and our abilities. We need to make sure that young people in universities have access to the top quality post-secondary educations have access to being able to afford it, to be able to choose to go longer through education, which means, for example, what we've done around guaranteeing that you don't have to start paying back your student debts until you're making at least $25,000 a year. That's something that's going to make a significant difference in people choosing to follow through on their education. We've changed from tax credits, which you pick up at the end of the year, to upfront grants that we've increased by 50% for low and middle income students to be able to access the post-secondary education we need. And on the K-12 area, we're working with the provinces to encourage teaching coding at a young age so that young people can start to understand that regardless of their career, being powerful users of computers, of technology, knowledgeable users of how to program algorithms, how to think and help machines and computers do part of the work and the jobs that we're going to have is going to be essential to our success as a country. So I'm a deep believer in education, but I know that education is needing to change to give more flexibility, more opportunity, more awareness to the world and the new challenges that are coming at us extremely quickly and in an extremely challenging way. I have tremendous faith in Canadians, in our ability to face down and overcome the many obstacles we're facing. But I also know that as a society, as a country, we need to be investing in giving people the tools they need to succeed in education, training, developing new skills is going to be an essential part of that. And being innovative and creative in the way we deliver those skills is going to be a hugely important part of that success. Thank you for your question. Question from down here now. You.
Good evening. My question is about the Case Processing Center in Vegreville, Alberta. I don't know if you're familiar, but it's moving to Edmonton. The community is quite concerned about it because 10% of the community is employed there. Can you speak a little bit to the reason for moving it to Edmonton and if anything will be done to help the community to deal with that?
Yes, this was a decision that the immigration minister took based on evidence, based on the needs of our responsibilities of providing government services in a responsible way. There's no question that it's a difficult decision for the people who work at the centre in Vegreville. Which is why there was, I know, an offer that anyone who wanted to keep their job and do it in Edmonton would be able to. Those who didn't would be offered compensation and packages. But any time there are shifts like this, it can be very, very difficult in a community. And I'm sorry about that. I'm aware of how difficult it is. I myself went through Vegreville a number of years ago. While I was campaigning for the leadership, so I know what a strong community it is, and it's one of those decisions that one has to make in government that is a difficult one. We have a responsibility to deliver the programs and services that Canadians expect at a high value level for the contributors who actually fund our government, taxpayers. And making that balance right and making that work as best we can is what we're focused on. But in this case, I know how difficult it is for people within that community, and I know we are also dedicated to help ease the transition and look for ways to minimize the very real impacts on the community. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Felix
You're not going
Thomas
to read all of that, are you?
No. Okay. Just 2 pages. Just one line on the one page is that no relationship is more important to me and to Canada than the one with Indigenous peoples. That's part of a mandate letter that was given to all ministers.
Every single one.
And I think, I guess from us with the Saskatoon Tribal Council, I guess my question to you is that obviously you think this is an important relationship, but obviously Canada doesn't itself think it's an important relationship because they haven't shown it yet. And I think that there's a disconnect between what you said and how your administration, particularly Indigenous Affairs, has taken that relationship. We see that disconnect in many ways, but a good example is the $8.4 billion that's been promised. Not a lot has reached our communities yet, and that's especially in areas of education. And I know that people think that wrongly that we're getting all this money, but we haven't seen anything yet. And I think that's where we want to make sure that people understand that. Now, I know that you've cultivated some relationships with the national organizations, and that's important, but those aren't nations. And I think for us, the individual First Nations are the ones that are the treaty holders. They're the ones with the constitutional rights, and that's where yourself and your ministers need to be meeting with those. And we've had some meetings with ministers. They've lasted about 5 minutes, and that's not a nation-to-nation relationship. I guess my question to you is, as the committer to this relationship, how are you going to fulfill this important relationship and ensure deliverology?
Yeah. Listen, you're absolutely right that this relationship is of fundamental importance to me and to Canada. Making sure that we have true reconciliation, true partnership with Indigenous peoples is essential for how we move forward. And we know that the damages have been great over the past decades, generations, and centuries, and there is much to do. But because of our actions over the last year, there are about 2,000 kids who started up the school year in September in a brand new school across the country in Indigenous communities. 16 long-term boil water advisories were ended, with a lot more going to be lifted in the coming years. And we're going to reach our target of ending boil water advisories across the country within 5 years. We have made significant strides forward on investing in Indigenous and First Nations education, $2.6 billion. And these are things that, yes, are not happening as fast as everyone would like. I'm impatient as well on getting this done, but we also know we have to get it done right, in partnership. We have to build capacity. We have to make sure that we are truly empowering young people. We have to make sure we are truly listening to and giving weight to the elders and to the young people who have clear visions of how they need opportunities. You know, I've spoken with a number of chiefs who said, yeah, we need a youth center. You want to talk about young people? We need a youth center in our community. Okay, well, what do you want in that youth center? Well, you know, we need TVs and lounges and sofas so they can hang around. And when a chief says that to me, I pretty much know they haven't actually talked to their young people. Because most of the young people I've talked to are asking for a place to store their canoes and paddles so they can connect back out on the land, and a place with internet access so they can do their homework in a meaningful way, because their homes are often too crowded and they need a place to work and study. We need to make sure we are listening to Indigenous voices, because it's not just about throwing money at the problem. Although, yes, we've got a lot of investments going. It's also about demonstrating real progress on issues that have gone on far too long. And that's going to take new ways of approaching these challenges. It's going to take learning on both sides, on the government side and on the Indigenous side, as we figure out how to get this right. Because, as I've said, Canadians are here with us on this. They want, non-Indigenous Canadians want to see us repair this relationship and move forward in shared prosperity and opportunity. This is a chance like we've never had before, where the goodwill on all sides is there. we have to do it right. This is a tremendous responsibility to, yes, give the emergency supports and the mental health crisis supports that we need right now for kids who are going through terrible, difficult times, for communities that are suffering and struggling right now. But we also have to be building for the long term. We also have to be preventing the cycles that have been set up because of the lost generations due to residential schools. We have to get this right. We have to do it together, and that means being thoughtful and responsible about how we move together. That's what Canadians expect. That's what Indigenous Canadians, Indigenous peoples I've met with expect, and that's what I expect of our government. We will work together. We will change this for the better, but it's going to take years. It's going to take decades in some cases before we have reversed centuries of mistreatment. So thank you for your leadership, and I look forward to continuing to work with you. Yes, sir. There's a mic coming there.
Well, thank you, Prime Minister, for coming this evening. I don't really have a question for you. I simply wanted to say I'm very grateful for you coming out here. I have a great deal of respect for you to come out in front of everybody and just take live questions. And I want you to let you know that myself, my wife, my family, my community, we're all praying for you. For you as you guide this country, for your family, as you still are the leader of that too. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. I was raised by a father who was very Catholic in the old school Quebec way. We went to church just about every Sunday. Said my prayers every night as a family. Read the Bible every Sunday evening. And my faith is an important part of who I am. And knowing that there are folks out there praying for me is really important to me. This isn't always the easiest job. But I do know an awful lot of politicians, and every single one I know truly believes, whether they're religious or not, believes that the calling of service, of trying to do right by your community, trying to build a better future, is one that we have to constantly rededicate ourselves to. And whether it's meeting community members here or hearing from you today, I thank you for reminding me of the importance of what it is we're working on hard together to build a better world and a better future for all of us. Thank you very much. And what section haven't I dealt with? You. Yes, you. I think you get the last question of the night, too, because we've been going a while.
Hi, thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister, for coming here today. You mentioned at the beginning of your opening that today's Bell Let's Talk Day, and mental health issues are very close to me personally and my family, and I'm sure they're close to many of us in the room today. And I was yeah. And so my question for you is, what can the federal government do to further mental health initiatives, notwithstanding the fact that healthcare falls under provincial jurisdiction?
Yeah, listen, that's a great question. And first of all, thank you for standing up. You know, it shouldn't require any courage to stand up and ask a question like that, but I know, unfortunately, still these days it does. There's still a stigma around health issues, and too many people don't talk about them out loud. And I'm incredibly proud today that I got to exchange tweets with Clara Hughes, who has demonstrated her courage and bravery in sharing her own struggles with the mental health issues and sharing and inspiring Canadians to shift their approach. I'm incredibly proud of my mom, who has been sharing her lifelong struggles with mental health, which, you know, when you think about it, the statistics say 1 in 5 Canadians struggle with mental health issues, which means 5 in 5 Canadians know someone who struggles with mental health issues, either friends or family or colleagues and workmates. So we need to do a lot more about supporting, about creating resilient, supportive communities, about addressing the fact that this issue has a massive cost on individuals, on families, on communities, and on jobs in our economy as well. Which is why one of the things that we've done as a federal government is recognize the need for real action on mental health. And we've committed a historic, unprecedented $5 billion to mental health specifically over the next 5 years. And I'm very proud to say that Saskatchewan and Brad Wall is one of the 7 premiers who has signed on to that approach in meaningful ways. This is something that we can agree on, that all Canadians know we have to move forward in thoughtful, responsible ways on. And one of the things that we're very much interested and indeed excited about is the fact that the research has shown that for most people who've faced mental health challenges, some of their first occurrences or first symptoms happen when they are young people. So one of the goals that we have is to try and make sure that young people have much better access to mental health support. Timely, easy, free access to the kinds of support that they need as they go through difficult moments. This is a day where we need to talk about that. This is a day where we need to be understanding of how being strong, compassionate, resilient as a country is essential to our success and is exactly what we intend to do in the coming years. I thank you all for your questions tonight. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's great to be back in Saskatoon. Thank you for participating in this open town hall. Thank you for all your questions. I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you.